On this video, I'm going to talk about some of the finer points of multiplying and dividing integers. Now, one thing you need to understand is that the multiplication and division rules for integers are much easier than the ones for addition and subtraction, so don't get the two confused. But instead of me going over all the particular rules, I do want to talk about a couple of specific examples of here. One of the biggest problems I see students mixing up is if they're given something like this, -4 divided by 0 versus 0 divided by -4. So here's what happens. If we think about -4 divided by 0, that's a little weird problem, right? A lot of students want to say that the answer is -4. Guys, the answer to either one of these problems is not -4. Let me give you a quick rundown here of what happens. Let's say, for instance, I take 0 divided by anything, and let's call that anything k. So 0 divided by anything, which I called k. Now, guys, one thing I do want to mention, that anything can, of course, be 0. We don't want to divide by 0, so we'll talk about that in just a second. But 0 divided by anything, if you'll notice, is okay. It's 0. So 0 divided by anything is okay. It's 0. So this is just going to be a quick way to help you memorize what these things are supposed to be. What if we flip that around, though? What if we do anything divided by 0? And, of course, our anything we call k. Now, k we don't want to be equal to 0, but anything else. So anything divided by 0 is a KO. It's a knockout. You can't have it. This particular thing is undefined. So here's what happens. If we go back to our two original problems here, do you notice how we have 0 on the bottom? Well, 0 on the bottom, of course, is going to mean that thing is undefined by those two new rules I just give you. So this one is undefined. Whereas if we look at the other one, 0 divided by -4, well, because the 0 is on top, that's going to give us a 0. So guys, when it comes to the 0, it doesn't really matter what you have on the top or bottom. It matters where the 0 is located. Let me explain this a little bit more in depth here. Let's go to this example, the 0 divided by -4 first. Guys, since this is a division problem, the opposite of division, of course, is multiplication. So I'm actually going to prove to you why that is the case. So if I was to rewrite this as multiplication, I would take this -4, and I want to multiply it by my answer. So, of course, my answer here is 0. So is -4 times 0 equal to what this thing up here was, which was 0. So is -4 times 0, 0. Well, of course it is, so that's why we get 0. Let's go back to this undefined here. If I write this out, I'd have 0 times whatever my answer is equal to -4. Well, if you'll notice, our answer is undefined. And the reason that is, can I really take 0 and multiply it by something and get -4? Well, no, that doesn't make sense, because 0 times anything is going to give me 0. So that's why this ends up being undefined. There's nothing that we can fill into this blank here and make it equal to -4, so we call it undefined. Now, something else I want to discuss is this idea of parentheses when it comes to multiplication. Let me give you another example here. What if I have -4 or -1 raised to the 4th versus -1 in parentheses raised to the 4th? Now, guys, just kind of like we just saw with the 0 being on the bottom of the fraction versus 0 being on the top, what happens is math is very, very nitpicky. It does matter whether you've got parentheses or division by 0 or whatever. So with this particular example here, oh, I've got some lines here. Let me get rid of those. With this particular example here, this first one, what this actually means, because it's not in parentheses, this is saying that we have just got a 1 raised to the 4th. So if I was to write that out, what this actually means is this. We keep the negative, and this really is saying we're doing 1 times 1 times 1 times 1. Well, 1 times 1 times 1 times 1, of course, is just 1. But we have to keep the negative. So, guys, they intentionally put the negative out front without putting it in parentheses to say we want to make this problem negative. Well, let's compare that to the other one, this -1 in parentheses raised to the fourth. Because the -1 is in parentheses, that means you're actually raising the whole entire thing to the fourth power. So that means this time we're going to carry the negative with us every time we write down a 1. So this is going to be a -1 times a -1 times a -1 times a -1. So -1 times -1 times -1 times -1. There's 4 negatives, that's going to give us a positive. So we end up with a positive 1. Remember, guys, these are exponents too, so they do tell us how many times that we have to write down our number. One of the biggest mistakes I see made is if I give either one of these problems in class, students are really bad to tell me the answer is either -4 or 4 because they want to do 1 times 4. Remember, the exponent just says, oh, write it down this many times.